welcome there, Mindsetters. It's winter school and it's only the second day, and you're here with me, Megs, and we're doing history, yay, civil society protest. So I want to tell you about what we've got going here, but first, Mumsy's going to tell us all about what we've got going on here today for this whole hour here on Mindset Learn Extra. Tell us, Mumsy, what's going on?
Okay, welcome grade 12 learners. It's good to see you again. Today we'll be looking at civil society protests. This is an exemplar from this year's GDE exam, or Department of Basic Education exam. So that is what we'll be looking at, and we'll be looking at source analysis and how to answer questions. Okay.
Perfect, Mumsy. So I want to tell you about the Winter School World Cup competition. I'm going to be posting it on Facebook. That's facebook.com/Learn Extra. And what's going to be happening is you click on that link, it's going to take you to Curio, and the keyword is learn. Don't forget learn. So I'm going to post that on Facebook in just a minute, and I also want to tell you that the competition closes on Friday, and that lucky person could win an Intel tablet. So get entering, get your votes in. Any questions, any queries for me, then just let me know. That will be on facebook.com/Learn Extra, as well as Twitter @Learn Extra. And also I'm going to be posting where you can get all the notes, but I'm also going to post that on Facebook. So don't worry, that's at learn.mindset.co.za. It's me, Megs, and have a fantastic hour. Any questions, just throw it back to me. Mumsy, now it's you.
Thank you very much, Megan. Okay, let's start with our civil society protests. As I said to you, we'll be looking at how to analyze sources and how to answer history questions. So today we'll be looking at two types of sources. We'll start with a written source, and then we'll look at a visual source. Okay. So if you come to our board here, you'll see that there's an instruction here. It tells you, study sources A and B, and then answer the questions that follow. And then it tells you what source A is. Source A, the source below focuses on the strategies adopted by protesters, the reaction by the state authorities, and the impact of media coverage of the Birmingham campaign of 1963. I'm just going to underline a few things because this caption is very, very important. It's going to help you answer the questions later on. So we'll look at our caption again. It says it focuses on the strategies adopted by the protesters. In case you get a question asking you how the protesters protested against the government at the time, then you know that the source will have that information. And it also focuses on the reaction by the state authorities. Okay, so those are the two things. So the first one is the strategies. I'll write number 1 there. And then the second thing is the reaction by state authorities. And then there is a third thing that this source focuses on, and that is the impact of media coverage on the Birmingham campaign. So it's the impact of media coverage. So we're looking at what happened as a result of the media reporting on the Birmingham campaign. Okay, so I'm going to write number 3 there. And then what you're going to do now, we're going to read the source together to look for important points that are going to help you understand not only the event, but also to be able to answer questions later on. Okay. Now, the source reads, the Birmingham campaign began quietly with sit-ins. Okay, I'm going to quickly underline sit-ins because that should help you understand the strategies that were used. Because as you will know, that during the civil rights protests, people use different tactics to fight for civil rights. So we are introduced to sit-ins in this source. And it was on the 3rd of April 1963 at several downtown whites-only lunch counters. From the outset, the campaign confronted an apathetic, and then it does tell you in brackets the meaning of apathetic, that means uninterested, black community. Now you already know that the black community was not interested. I'm going to underline that because this is an important thing for you, okay, the black community. So in other words, those are the people who were supposed to be part of this campaign, part of the civil society protest. But initially, they were not interested. an openly hostile established black leadership, and Bull Connor's non-violent resistance. Okay, so even if you don't know who Bull Connor was at the moment, you know that his resistance was non-violent. And you will see later on if this is going to change. Now remember, in history, it's very important to understand all these concepts. What are civil rights and what did non-violence mean? And the non-violent resistance in the form of police arrests of the offenders of the city's segregation ordinances. With no sensational news. Okay, I'm going to underline that again because remember when we looked at the caption, we said we're going to look at the impact of media coverage. So now we are told here that there was no sensational news. So in terms of what the media was reporting, it was not sensationalized at that point. And then we will see as time goes on, as we read further, to see if things changed. The national media found nothing to report. So at this stage, at the beginning of the campaign, there was nothing to report. And as a result of that, what happened was that the campaign floundered or declined. So now you are being introduced to another very important skill in history, cause and effect. Now, because there was nothing to report, okay, so let me use a different color there to write. This was the cause. There was nothing to report, and as a result of that, the campaign declined. So this was the result or the effect. Okay, excuse my handwriting. Okay, but you can see cause and effect. Nothing to report, and as a result of that, then there was a decline in the campaign. But then things change. You can see that we're now being introduced to a different idea because it does say, let me use a different color so you can see, but. Okay, so now we're moving from a previous idea to a new idea. So, but when Connor ordered out police dogs to disperse a crowd of black bystanders, okay, bystanders, people who were just standing there, not being part of this campaign, the journalists recorded the attack. So now things had already changed, and that is when the journalists then reported the attack. They recorded the attack of a German Shepherd on a non-violent protester. Okay, I'm going to underline that because that is very important, that the people who were protesting there were not violent. So already you can see the violence that was used by the police when they were told by their authorities to use the dogs, the police dogs. Okay, they were using them on the non-violent protesters, thereby revealing the brutality that undermined segregation. So it revealed the brutality that undermined segregation. So again, you can see cause and effect there. Let's read on. In a desperate bid to generate media coverage and to keep the campaign alive, the children's campaign was launched on the 2nd of May 1963, in which black youth from area schools served as demonstrators, trying to avoid the use of force. So again, you can see that Bull Connor is trying to be non-violent. So he's trying to avoid the use of force. Bull Connor arrested hundreds of school children. I'm going to underline that again because it's going to lead on to something. Okay. So Bull Connor arrested hundreds of school children. Obviously, that is going to cause a reaction from the people because these were school children who were arrested, and hauled them off to jail on school buses. And when the jails were filled, so that means there were lots and lots of these students in jail, he called out fire hoses and police dogs to contain large protests. Okay, now again, this is where cause and effect come in. It's because the jails were filled. So the jails were full. So this is the cause. And then what happened as a result of the jails being overcrowded? He then, let me use a different color there to show the effect, called out fire hoses and police dogs to contain the crowd or the large protesters. So I'm going to write there, effect. Now remember, I told you those are very important things in history. You need to know what happened and then what happened as a result of that, cause and effect. And then if we read on, African American spectators responded with outrage, pelting police with bricks and bottles as firemen opened up the hoses. The media captured the negative images. Again, this is very important because we said when we read the caption that we will be looking at the media coverage, how the media reported on what was going on. So the media, it captured the negative images. So obviously I'm going to quickly circle the negative so you can see, because this is bound to evoke some emotions in people. Of Connor and his men suppressing the non-violent protest of school children with brutal blasts of water cannons and attacks from police dogs. So already you can see that there is violence directed at these people. Okay, and then it reads on, front page photographs in the nation's newspapers convinced President Kennedy to send Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights Burke Marshall to Birmingham to secure negotiations that would end the violent demonstrations. So again, it takes us back to that cause and effect that I told you about. Now, you can see that there is chaos because what happened was that the jails were full and then the police with their dogs were sent out to contain that chaos, and then the people obviously responded with outrage and they were not happy because of the way they were being treated. And because of the media coverage of the event, okay, the president in Washington, D.C. saw what was happening, and then this is what he did. He sent an Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Burke Marshall, okay, don't worry if you don't remember his name, it's right here, to Birmingham to secure negotiations that would end the violent demonstrations. So this was the result. So as you can see, we've looked at cause and effect, we've looked at the role of the media, we've looked at the role of the police, and we've looked at what happened as a result of the chaos that was caused there. So that is how you should analyze your written source. Now the information at the bottom of the source that tells you that this source is from WW Encyclopedia and so on, don't stress about that. That information is not for you. This is the information that the examiners use to show where they got this source from. But the most important information that you as a student are going to use is the information found at the top of the source. So this information here is very, very important because that is the information that tells you what the source is about, and if there are any important characters or historical figures that you need to take note of, that information will be right in that caption. So that is what you need to read first, because a lot of historians or history students just go straight to the source. They ignore this caption. But the caption is there for a reason, to guide you and to give you an understanding of what the source is about. So that when you go on to reading the source itself, you know exactly that you are looking for these three things that I underlined earlier on. I said we were looking for the strategies that were used by the protesters. Remember, I underlined sit-ins. And then I said we were going to look at the reaction by state authorities. So in other words, the authorities in Birmingham, how they reacted to what the people were doing, the protesters were doing, and then the impact of media coverage. So how did the government in Washington, D.C. reacted because of what they saw in the media. Now remember, we did look at that and we said because of the photographs and the reports that were published in the newspapers, President Kennedy responded by sending a person to go and start negotiations there. So that is how you should analyze a written source. We're going to look at a visual source, but I'm going to hand over to Megan, and then later on we will look at a written source that goes hand in hand with this written source. Over to you, Megan.
Thanks, Mumsy. Guys, put your pens and pencils down, quickly grab some water, but we'll be right back after the break. See you in a jiffy. Welcome back, Mindsetters. So we're here at Winter School, and don't forget to enter the competition. That's the Winter School World Cup competition here at Mindset. I'll be posting the link shortly. Go and enter to get that big prize on Friday. Like I said, it's a tablet from Intel. So, Mumsy, I'd want to win a tablet, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Exactly. So get entering and get your votes in. Any questions, please, guys, get posting on facebook.com/learn extra so Mumsy and I can see all your questions and answer any of them just for you. Let's get back to civil society protests, though. Mumsy?
Okay, thank you very much, Megan. Welcome back. So before the break, we looked at a written source on the Birmingham campaign. And remember, I promised you that we are now going to look at a visual source. Now remember, when we're looking at this visual source, we'll be looking for similarities and differences between the two sources. So in other words, even before you look at your questions, you need to ask yourself, does this source portray what is written in the written source, or it shows a negative side of what is in the written source? Because later on you will see that there will be questions where you are expected to compare the two sources. So it's very, very important whenever you're reading sources in history to look for similarities and differences. So again, just like with the written source that we looked at before the break, with this one, we're going to read the caption first, because that is a very, very important thing. As I said before the break, the caption tells you exactly what the source is about before you even start reading it or analyzing it if it's a visual source, as we are going to do now. Okay, so let's quickly look at our source. Source B, this photograph, so already tells you that this is a photograph. It's not a cartoon, it's a photograph. So already what should be going on in your mind? That it captured the moment as it happened. Because the difference between a photograph and a cartoon is that in a cartoonist decides what they want to include there. Whereas in a photograph, the photographer, even though they choose when to take the photo, but they capture the moment. In other words, I know that these days there is photoshopping and all those sort of things, but a photograph captures the moment. Okay, so there will be more of a political agenda in a cartoon and less in a photograph. It will be there in a photograph, but it will not be as blatant as in a cartoon. Okay, so we already know that this visual source we are going to be analyzing is a photograph. Okay, and then it tells you that it appeared in the Daily News during the Birmingham campaign of 1963. So already you know the context, that this visual works hand in hand with the written source we looked at before the break, because they were both from the same time. It shows the firemen who had been ordered to use their high pressure hoses. Okay, I'm going to underline that. It shows the firemen who had been ordered, let me circle the ordered, to use their high pressure hose, we already know that, on civil rights protesters who are seated on the pavement. So already it tells you where the different characters are. Now, when we read that written source, we did say that Bull Connor ordered his policemen to go out to the streets with their dogs and the hoses to deal with the chaos that was going on. So now, this same information is presented in a visual form. Now let's look at that. So you look at your photograph, you can see this side. You've got your firemen and you can see the water there. going all the way, and then it tells you that the civil rights protesters are seated on the pavement. So now you can see the pavement there. So there are the civil rights protesters there. And then later on, you already know, even before you look at the questions, what type of questions can be asked here. Okay, because remember, we're looking at the civil rights movement with a special focus on the Birmingham campaign. So we looked at the fact that it started as a non-violent campaign, but then it turned out to be violent. And we looked at the reasons why, and then we also looked at the impact of the media coverage. And then in terms of the media coverage, already you can see that this is the photograph that comes from the Daily News, as we've already stated, and it's there as well. Okay, so that is what the media reported. And that obviously had an impact on the way people reacted to the civil rights. Okay, so now we've looked at both the written and the visual sources. Now let's look at the type of questions you are likely to get from these sources. Obviously, some questions will be dealing with the written source specifically, others will be dealing specifically with the the visual source, and then there will be a question or two that compare these two sources. Okay, now let's go to our questions as promised. The first question is, identify two reasons. Identify two reasons. Okay, now this two is written in capital letters, and you need to find the reasons. Not the results, but the reasons. So read your questions carefully so that you'll know exactly what you're expected to do. Identify two reasons why the initial campaign against segregation in Birmingham was unsuccessful. And then another very important thing that is going to help you when you're answering these questions is the mark allocation. 2 times 1 equals 2. That means each reason is worth 1 mark. Okay, so even if you're not sure of the mark allocation, the instruction does tell you that you need to give 2 reasons why the initial campaign against segregation in Birmingham was unsuccessful. Now, you'll remember from reading that written source that we did look at that. Now, let's look at the possible response here. African American communities were apathetic, remember that word, uninterested. They were apathetic towards their campaign. There was hostility from an established black leadership. Police arrests were initially non-violent. National news did not report extensively on their cause. Now, as you can see here, obviously this will not appear in your exam paper, but you will know from the way the question is asked. Okay, I just want to point out something that is in the memo here, that this is just extraction of evidence from the source. That is very important. So if you read your questions carefully, then you will know that you are expected to just take out information from the source. So in other words, this question is testing your comprehension skills. So please don't try and be creative and give your own knowledge or your own understanding, your own analysis of the source. No. Okay, the examiner wants to see if you've understood your written source. And then you just take out the information. The answer is already there. But obviously you will not be able to find that answer if you have not understood the source. Let's now move on to the next question. So the next question is, what motivated Connor to change his tactics during the Birmingham campaign? Again, the mark allocation is very important. 1 times 2 equals 2. So you only need 1 point there, and it's worth 2 marks. Again, that answer is found in the source itself. Now let's look at a possible answer there. When the jails were full, Connor changed tactics. He ordered the use of fire hoses and the police dogs to disperse the demonstrators. We already looked at that. Remember when we were analyzing that written source, where I said to you it's cause and effect. So because the jails were crowded, so the state authorities responded by using the police dogs, and the fire hoses to disperse the crowd. That is how they dealt with the chaos that was taking place in Birmingham. So again, that information, if you look at that answer, the information is directly from the source. Again, you cannot just come up with your own creative answer. It has to be the answer from the source itself. And then the next question, explain how the spectators and the source responded to police action. Okay, I'm quickly going to underline explain, because that is important. You are not just extracting knowledge here, but there has to be a bit of explanation as well. By explaining, it doesn't mean that you're being creative and giving your own answers there. No, you are still showing understanding of the source, but it's obviously a longer response because you are now explaining. We now want to see if there is a deeper understanding of the source. In other words, you didn't just take issues at face value. Now let's look at a possible response there. Okay, now before I read the possible response, remember I told you the mark allocation is very important. So if you look at this, it does say 2 times 2 equals 4. That means you're expected to give 2 different points there in order to explain your answer. So it's very important. So you read the instruction and then you look at the mark allocation, and that is going to help you. Now let's look at the possible response here. The spectators were outraged by police attacks on children and hit back by throwing bricks and bottles. Okay, again, going back to the question, explain how the spectators in the source responded. So the question does tell you, you are not looking at how the authorities responded, but the spectators. They've even put the word in inverted commas so that you know that you are only looking at the spectators and not the other players, because there were different groups of people. Remember, we said there were the protesters, okay, there were bystanders, people who were just looking, and then there were the state authorities, people who were working for the government, and then there was the media as well. So there were lots of different people that were part of this Birmingham campaign, and obviously they would all respond in different ways depending on what was going on. So it's very, very important to note that in this case you're not asked how the state, that is the state authorities of Birmingham, responded, but you are asked how the spectators responded to police action. And then if you look at the next response, the spectators did not maintain the non-violent methods of the civil rights demonstrators because they were spectators. They were not part of the civil rights demonstrators anyway. They were just on the side as the bystanders, so they were not going to be non-violent. This answer or this response already tells you that the civil rights protesters themselves were non-violent. But then the bystanders or spectators were not going to be non-violent because they were obviously offended by the way the state authorities had responded to the people. I hope you can see how the different players come into this whole campaign. That is very, very important. And then we'll look at the next question. In what ways did the media coverage, okay, now we are looking at the media now. We are not looking at the state authorities. We are not looking at the spectators. We are not looking at the civil rights campaigners, but now we're looking at the media coverage. Now remember, I did tell you that those are the 3 things we will be looking at. So now we are looking at how the media, the newspapers, reported on this issue. In what ways did the media coverage of the Birmingham campaign contribute to the success of the civil rights movement? Now this question already tells you that the civil rights movement had, I'm going to underline, the success of the civil rights movement in the United States of America in the 1960s. Okay, there were some failures okay, in some parts of the country. But remember, we're looking at this Birmingham campaign and how it contributed to what was going on. And again, your mark allocation is very important. 2 times 2 equals 4. That means you need to give 2 separate points. Now let's look at a possible response there to answer that question. The media exposed the actions and brutality of the security forces, which compelled President Kennedy to intervene to secure negotiations. Now that is very important. Remember, when we are analyzing the source, we said cause and effect. So that is what happened. And then another thing that happened was that there was extensive media attention, both nationally and internationally. So I'm going to quickly underline those things. Extensive media attention, okay? The media exposed the actions and brutality, and then you have your result there, that President Kennedy was then compelled to intervene because of that. Okay, so now we're going to take another quick ad break, and then when we come back, we're going to carry on with our questions. Over to you, Megan.
Thanks, Mumsy. She made me understand that picture way better than I thought I could, and I hope she made you understand. Let me know on facebook.com, but for now, we're taking an ad break. See you afterwards. Welcome back, historians, mindsetters, matrix. We are here doing history and civil society protests. Civil. Anyway, so Mumsy and I just got a question from Romario Roman, and he says, "Hi there, Megs. I would like to ask, should we focus on Cuba for the exams, Mumsy?"
Okay, welcome back, and thanks for that question. Yes, you need to focus on Cuba, and please stay tuned, because after this live show, there is a lesson on the Cuban Missile Crisis, and that is going to help you.
Awesome. And for our winter school competition, I just wanted to pick your brain because the new countries have been issued, and they are Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, and the Netherlands. So out of those 4, which one would you pick?
I would pick Banyana.
None of my teams are here, so, but if I had to, I'd probably pick Netherlands, because host countries can't win. I just find that they just don't ever win. So,
you never
but
know.
yeah, you never know. Anyway, let's get back to history with Mumsy. Let's go.
Okay, now let's carry on. So before the break, we looked at the visual source, we analyzed it, and then we looked at our questions based on the written source. Now let's look at the next question. It does tell you that you need to focus on source B. It says consult source B. Give 2 pieces of evidence. Now you'll remember our source B is that visual source, that photograph that we analyzed. Give 2 pieces of evidence. I'm going to quickly underline that because it's very, very important. You can't give 4. You can't give 1. You have to give 2 pieces of evidence from the source which suggests that the civil rights activists were non-violent in their approach. I'm going to underline that as well. Okay, now we did see that in our written source, but this is specifically about the visual source. Give 2 pieces of evidence from the source which suggests that the civil rights activists were non-violent in their approach. As you can see, the mark allocation 2 times 1 equals 2. So that means each piece of evidence is worth 1 mark. Now let's look at the possible response there. Even when attacked with high power hoses, the demonstrators remain non-violent. Now if you go back to that visual, you will see that the protesters who were sitting on the pavement were sitting there covering their faces or their bodies. They were not fighting back. So it's very, very important to use the visual. So in other words, don't just use your own information. Your own knowledge comes in context of this whole event, but when you're asked to analyze the source, then you need to extract information from the source. Okay, let's look at another possible response here. The demonstrators photographed sitting peacefully with arms up to protect their heads. I've already told you that obviously there were campaigns or demonstrations throughout Birmingham, but the photograph captured that moment, and that moment that you were viewing shows the protesters sitting on the pavement, and instead of fighting back, they were just protecting their faces or their bodies. They had their arms up, not to fight back, but to protect themselves. Okay. And then another possible response is the demonstrators are sitting on the pavement soaking wet, but non-violent. So again, these three, you can see, they work hand in hand. They're all pointing to the fact that the protesters were not violent. They were not carrying any weapons. That's another possible response that you can include, which is not included in these possible responses here, that you can see them with their arms protecting their faces. They're not carrying any weapons or stones, which means that they would have been violent. So that can be another possible answer there. That is why, if you look at this, it says it's any two, but also it allows for any other possible response as well. Now let's look at the next question. Now this is a very interesting question for historians. Explain the usefulness, I'm going to underline, let me use a different color now. Explain the usefulness of this source to an historian writing about the role of the media. It's the role of the media now during the civil rights campaign. Now, it's very important to read this question carefully. They are not asking you about the role of the protesters or the role of the state authorities, but they want the role of the media during this time. And then they want you to look at the usefulness. Now, this is a concept you should be familiar with in history, because sometimes they can say to you, is this a reliable source? Now, those two don't mean the same thing. So if you get asked, is this a reliable source, that means, can this source be trusted? So that is where you evaluate the source and say, no, it cannot be trusted because this photographer was biased towards or against the protesters, and so on. So that is when you evaluate the source. But then when they're asking for usefulness, they are asking you whether this source can be used to illustrate a chapter on the civil rights campaign. So in other words, is there anything that can be used there, or is there anything that has been left out? Okay, so it's very important to look at what is there, but also look at what is not there. Because remember, you are not looking at this source in a vacuum. You will have studied your work, so you know about the civil rights campaign. And remember what I said to you before when we were analyzing the photograph, that it captures the moment. It doesn't show everything. It doesn't show you the things that happened before that led on to what is shown in the photograph. So that can be an answer. That can be your response to this question. You can say, no, this is not a useful source because it doesn't show everything that the media reported on. So it just shows a very, very small part of the campaign. Now let's look at the possible responses that you can come up with. Now remember, they are possible responses. It doesn't mean that they are the only responses you have to give. The photograph appeared in the Daily News, a newspaper, during the Birmingham campaign in 1963. Therefore, it is valid and relevant. Okay, that is very important. Remember, I told you that it captured, or that the photograph is about the moment when it happened. So it is a primary source. It is useful because of that they didn't just draw a picture later on, okay, or made a cartoon later on, but it was taken at the time of the event. Therefore, that is important. It's going to help the historians who are investigating this civil rights campaign. And then another possible answer, and mind you, I say possible because there are lots of different responses you can come up with. It provides a clear visual image of the police attacks on demonstrators and the bystanders during the Birmingham campaign. So in other words, when you ask this question, you need to describe the source as well, because describing the source is going to lead to the usefulness or whether it's not useful. Okay, that is very important. It illustrates the tactics and violence of the police against non-violent demonstrators. That's very important. It is an example of the sort of image which appeared in the media and won huge support for civil rights movement. Remember that cause and effect I spoke to you about earlier on? So you could also say that because of the photographs like this one shown here, the civil rights movement gained more members. So a lot of people became aware of what was going on, and as a result of the media coverage, they then joined the campaign for the civil rights in the United States. Now let's move on to the next possible response. It shows the racial profile of the police, okay, the white police. Again, if you go to the photograph there, you will see that the policemen are white and the demonstrators who were black in Birmingham. Again, this is where your context comes in, because remember, it was mostly the black people who were fighting for civil rights. They were the ones who were denied civil rights. It's true that within the civil rights movement, there were white people as well, who obviously sympathized with the black people. Okay, so they were also part of the civil rights movement, but the fight for civil rights was a fight for black people because they were the ones who were denied those civil rights. So you can see that in the photograph that the people have been profiled according to their race. The police were white, and then the protesters or demonstrators were black, the people who would have been fighting for civil rights. And then, this is very important, it says any other relevant response. So this allows you to come up with your own response as long as it is relevant. So again, it's going to be an informed response. Don't be creative and start, writing your own history. It can be your own response that is not given here, but make sure that it is within the context of what has been studied. So that is one way of answering this question. Another way of answering it, you can say, no, it's not useful. Remember I told you earlier on that when you're looking at a visual, you need to look at what is there, but you also need to look at what has been left out. So this is another possible response. You can say, no, this is not useful. And the reason is because the photographer is unknown. And that is important because if we don't know the photographer, we don't know what his agenda was. We don't know the aim for taking this photograph. Okay, so in some cases the photographer will be given, and you can use that when you're answering the question and say it is useful because this photographer was a member of the civil rights movement, or he experienced the protests firsthand, and so on. Okay, but in this case the photographer is not known, so we have no idea why he took this photograph, because there was obviously an agenda behind taking this photograph. Another possible response here is that the firemen do not seem to focus on the demonstrator seated on the pavement. Okay, that is obviously not an answer that most young people will come up with, but if you look at that photograph, you will see that the water is right above the protesters. It's not directed straight at them. So you could use that as well. That is acceptable, because when we are historians, we're taught that you have to be critical. You need to look at all those things. Okay. And then another one is, the photograph does not show everything that should be seen to have a holistic, okay, I'm going to underline holistic because that is important, understanding of the demonstration. Now, remember I did say to you that the photographs, by their nature, they capture the moment. They don't show you the before and after. They don't always do that. If you want to get a full picture of what happened, then sometimes you have to look at a variety of photographs, or even compare the photographs to the written sources and other sources as well, because the photograph only captures that specific moment. Okay, so you can use that to say that no, this source is not useful because it does not give that holistic understanding of the demonstration. And then it does say here in the marking guidelines, any other relevant response. So it's very similar to the previous one for saying it's useful that they allow you to give any other relevant response as long as it is within the context of what we are looking at. Okay, so we've looked at both the written and the visual sources. We're going to take another short break and then we'll carry on. Over to you, Megan.
Awesome, Mumsy. We'll get back. I'll read you the scores of the team so far when we get back, so keep there on the edge of your seat. We'll be right back. Welcome back, Mindsetters. So remember I said before the break I'd give you a score update on what's going on with the competition. So Brazil is on 4 likes, Colombia 1, Costa Rica 1, and Netherlands 1. So we need to get more votes, so you need to go like on facebook.com/learnextra. All the pictures that are posted of those countries, go and give them a like. Now, Mumsy, I have a question for you from one of our potential mindsetters. Let's go. It says, hey Megan, the last question on the source-based questions, do we write in point form or sentences?
That's a very good question. Thanks for that. Okay, now if you look at the instructions, remember I told you that it's very important to read the instructions. If you look at this instruction, I'm just going to look at it again with you. It says give 2 pieces of evidence. It doesn't say you need to explain or elaborate or anything. So yes, you can write in point form.
Point form, perfect.
Yes.
Okay, I know you want to carry on because we've got lots to do still, so
Okay,
go away.
We've got 2 more questions to look at, so let's carry on. Now, I won't be analyzing the sources because you already know them. Okay, this question is very interesting because it says refer to sources A and B. So in other words, you're referring to both the written and the visual sources. That's very, very important. Remember I told you reading instructions is very important. Okay, and then this is where you're now expected to explain. So in other words, you're now writing in full sentences. You are not going to be writing in point form. So even though the answers here, the possible responses, are written in point form, you are expected to write in sentences. Now, what do you have to explain? Explain how the information in source A supports the visual evidence in source B regarding the civil rights protest in Birmingham in 1963. Okay, I'm going to quickly circle these sources so that you can see. The instruction told you to look at both sources, A and B, okay? And then the instruction, also the question, says, how does the information in source A support the evidence, the visual evidence in source B? So it's very, very important that in your answer to this question, you refer to both sources. Okay, a lot of people make a mistake of just looking at the one source. So in other words, they will look at the visual source and say, this is how the visual source supports the other source, but then they will ignore the other source, source A. So you need to be looking at the similarities between the sources. So you say, source A does this, this is shown in source B. Source A says this in written form, this is shown in visual form in source B. It's very, very important that you're able to merge those 2 sources. Okay. Now let's look at the possible response there, and then we will quickly look at our essay. So source 3B refers to media capturing images of Connor and his men suppressing protests, and then source C is a product of media coverage. So you can see that these 2 work hand in hand. And then the next one, source 3B refers to Connor ordering fire hoses to be used to contain large protests, and source C shows the firemen using hoses on the protesters. And then the last one is source 3B talks of non-violent protests, while source 3C shows them seating on the pavement. So again, you are looking at both of them and you are looking for similarities. So as I said to you before, it's very important that you don't just look at the one source and ignore the other one, or just assume that the person marking will know what the other source is about. So it's up to you to show that you understand the correlation between these 2 sources. And again, another important thing is that it does say here, any other relevant source. Okay. So now let's move on to an essay. The Black Panther Party was established in the USA in 1966 for relevant and justifiable reasons. Now I'm going to quickly underline that. Relevant and justifiable reasons. Do you agree? Going to circle this with this statement. You need to support your argument, so it is an argument, using appropriate evidence. So even though the question is asking you, do you agree? Remember, this is an essay. So in a history essay, you never use personal pronouns. It's very important. So you can say it is evident or it can be seen that, and then, okay, you use your evidence. So the type of evidence you're going to select and the stance that you're going to take will tell the marker whether you agree or not. Please never ever say, yes, I agree, or no, I don't agree. That is not important. Okay. Now, if we look at the possible response here, okay, now candidates should indicate whether they agree or disagree. So from reading your introduction, I, as the marker, need to know whether you agree or disagree with the statement. Okay, without using personal pronouns, remember. And then in taking a specific line of argument, they need to support their response with the reasons. So this is where your own knowledge comes in. So I'm not going to read everything here, but the introduction should indicate whether you agree or disagree with the statement and indicate how you intend to answer the question posed. So in other words, you should tell us what kind of evidence you will be looking at. And then the rest of your essay will be your evidence, obviously, and then you write your conclusion where you sum up all your main points, remembering not to include new ideas in the conclusion. If there is anything that has not been discussed in an essay, please don't discuss it in the conclusion. Okay, that's it for today. I'm going to hand over to you, Megan.
Thanks, Mumsy. So I've got a lot to tell you in a short amount of time. Now the standings are Brazil 7, Colombia 1, Costa Rica 1, and Netherlands 2. So get liking on those pictures. And the winner for the competition today was Rafilwe Seboko. So congratulations to you. And the next show, don't forget Mindsetters, is the Cold War coming up right after this. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere, grade 12s. And my quote for you is, if you stop learning, you stop creating history, and you become history. That's all from me to you. Cheers, and see you again soon. Bye.